lengthy one. And we're back with Truth Unrestricted, the podcast that definitely will not be covering the Olympics. Sorry about that. If you wandered into this thinking that this was going to be about Olympics for reasons I don't understand, because nothing about it would indicate that, this is your opportunity to either leave or just stay anyway and learn about something that isn't the Olympics. So I'm Spencer, your host, and back again today with David Bloomberg. How you doing, David?
Okay, and I just wanted to thank you for not making me, step down and replacing me with a younger co-host, guest co-host.
Oh, David, there's still time, man. You lobbed that joke up for me. I can't do anything but spike it back down.
As long as we don't go to a brokered podcast.
Yeah, I'm not going to let other people, openly vote on who the other person should be. No,
Yeah.
I'll decide. I'm the dictator here.
Yes.
This isn't a democracy. Okay.
Okay,
So
Mr. Trump.
we are going to talk about another U.S. election update for the month of July. It's right the end of July. The Olympics just started, as I noted in my intro. And we have a lot to cover because it's been a minute, and it's been a lot of things that happen in that minute.
It's been a long minute.
So I think we should start with the thing that we last talked about when we last talked about election stuff, which was sort of the thing that happened most recently, but still, Biden stepped down and he endorsed Kamala Harris to be to run in his stead, which makes sense. This is the most sensible option.
Yes.
You and I both, we had a whole episode about this. We very publicly said that we thought this was a foolish decision, and we listed our reasons. One of those reasons was that we thought that having something like an open primary at the convention was going to cause a huge number of problems. So I'm happy to say that that doesn't look like it's happening, and that I'm happy to be wrong about that. If it wouldn't even make me wrong necessarily,
Right.
but it would mean that I'm wrong about it happening, and that I'm happy that if he's stepping down, that it's a seems to be a full backing of Kamala Harris, and that's good as it stands. It's the best way to have done this, is to have Biden voluntarily step down and have Kamala Harris step forward and just be the candidate. So
Yeah,
do you
and
have
I want
anything that you
to
need to have penance for, David?
well, I don't think we need penance. And that's it, where said just now something to the effect that we were against this happening. And it wasn't this.
Yeah,
Because we did not think
against
this.
Yeah.
What we were against, to clarify for anyone who may not
Right.
have listened to that episode, or if you have and you've forgotten, what we were against was the whole way it was happening.
Yeah.
I still think it was a terrible way of doing it. And it worries me for a number of reasons, not the least of which is that now there are some in the media who will think, rightly so, look at the power we have. We forced the president to decide not to run for re-election by our biased coverage of him. There are others. There are wealthy donors, actors.
Yeah.
Who are like, see, we went public and look what we did. I feel like a lot of this could have been handled more privately. Maybe they don't feel that way. Maybe they feel like they needed to whip up the public to show that those polls were dropping. But, whatever the reason, it ended up happening. I don't, like I said, but the main thing that we were worried about, or at least, speaking for myself, was at the time we recorded that, they had not settled on Harris.
No.
There were people out there, some of the same people who were trying to pressure Biden to step down, were saying, and we could have an open, uh, or we
Yeah.
could run a blitz series of mini primaries,
Right. There was
or
all
all these
kinds
other
of
things.
plans. Yeah.
Yeah, and there were people out there naming other politicians besides Harris to take the spot. And so the fear, which I think was justified at that point in time, was it would rip the Democratic Party apart. And so I want
Yeah.
credit. I think that, I don't know how long Biden had been planning it. Or, as a just in case measure or whatever. But I do want to credit Biden for, and the people who work for him, for the way it was handled. He
Mhm.
quickly, like within 20 minutes, endorsed Harris. And I was reading an article on the Washington about how even though none of the staff had any heads up, they had just in case preparations and they put those into action right away.
Yeah.
And that enabled it to kind of become a done deal before some of the fringe whiners could really do anything about it.
Yeah, there was a lot of talking heads in a lot of places. I had to unfollow a couple people who had really bad takes. I think the worst of them was um, a fairly prominent left-leaning podcaster that said that Biden should step down and have Kamala Harris run, and that she should select RFK Jr. as VP. I just blasted him. I just told him that he wasn't a serious person. That's the yeah. I didn't know what
Yeah,
else to say. I said, yeah, look, you're obviously just doing this for rage farming
right.
for clicks. You're not doing this as a serious commentator.
And
So yeah,
even like columnists are doing this. And
yeah,
I believe it was the Wall Street Journal. I could be wrong, so don't quote me on that. But there was a writer who, before Biden withdrew, he had written something saying Harris is the best bet the Democrats have. And then
mhm,
after Biden withdrew, he said, he wrote a column that was basically like, uh, here are the problems with Harris for the Democrats. And it's like, no,
right,
you can't have it both ways. You just, again,
yeah,
yeah, like you said, it's rage farming. It's
yeah,
writing the opposite of whatever is going on at the time.
contrarianism, yeah,
Yeah. And it's just ridiculous. And, you know, again, I do want to say also, I think that the people who shared our opinions that Biden should stay, some of them took it a little far. Like
yeah,
a
yeah,
senator, I
sure,
believe it was Schiff, came out and said, "Hey, I think that Biden should step down," and they're coming out. He will never get another vote from us again. Ah, it's like
yeah,
you got to calm down. You can't make
yeah,
enemies out of everyone who has a different opinion of you than you. I mean, I understand. Yeah, I didn't like that he said it publicly either.
yeah,
But almost all of the Democrats who were sharing their opinions were doing it because they felt it was the best way to proceed.
mhm.
And we could disagree on the best way to proceed.
But the
I said,
conversation needs to be had, right?
right.
Yeah,
Now, did it need to be had in the way it was? No. And I think that it fed the media machine in a way that I did not like. And that's why I specified the Democrats that were talking about it as opposed to those
mhm,
in the media,
yeah,
because they were doing it for clicks and other reasons, like the New York Times just for revenge. But
yeah,
um, but the Democrats, and that's what was going on, was there were these attacks. There were these internal attacks on one another. And I didn't like engaging that, even though I recognize that I said on this podcast that the people who believed the certain way were fools at that moment. That's what it appeared to me based on history.
Mm-hmm.
They looked like they were fools to believe things could go so smoothly. It turned out it did,
And
but I,
immediately in the first few hours, there were a couple people that want to be like, "Oh yeah, yeah, I'll
right.
run, I'll run," and
Yeah.
yeah,
I believe RFK Jr. and Marianne Williams supported
I
that too.
there was also a an independent who's no longer a Democrat that volunteered to join the party again to run for president for them. Uh,
Oh
uh,
yeah,
Joe Manchin.
Mansion, yes.
Yeah,
Well, and
right.
then he said he never did.
Yeah,
And so, but it was. I mean, the point is, they should not have been attacking people in the way that they were. I disagreed with people online. I disagreed with people here,
yeah.
but that doesn't mean I was saying I will never. Well, I mean, I'm not going to vote for a senator in California no matter what. But, um, um,
Empty
but
threat. I will never vote. I will
yeah,
also never vote for a senator
yes,
in
exactly.
California.
But the way the attacks were going, it was just like, can we at least understand that he's not doing it out of any gain for himself? He's doing it because this is what they believe is the best path.
Yeah,
I believed that they were wrong. We will never know. This is not a choose your own adventure novel where
yeah.
at the, when we get to November and we get to the end of the story, we can't like turn back to the decision that was made in July and say, oh, now let's run it this way and see what
Yeah.
happens.
Save the video game at this point before you
Right.
make this critical decision and then move back to that save point. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's not possible.
So obviously, right now, things have taken off. I will fully admit, I kind of felt a sense of relief when he stepped down. It wasn't that I wanted him to, it was that it had just become like a heavy burden that everyone was carrying at this point. This whole argument had become a burden to the whole Democratic Party and to the
Yeah.
election.
It became the only thing that anyone talked about with the Democratic Party.
Right.
Was how bad their candidate was, which,
Yeah.
you know, okay.
And
Uh,
and
yeah.
so, you know, there has been a new wave of excitement. Um, Everybody or almost everybody has, come back together again. The Obviously the donations have rolled in hundreds of millions of dollars worth of donations.
Mm-hmm.
The polls are showing her ahead, but it's July.
Yeah.
Polls in July, I don't know how much that shows, or rather, polls right after something big happens. Is this just a bump because the grass is always greener type of
Yeah.
situation? Um, we don't
Yeah,
know.
it's still a long race, right? It's still longer
Right.
than most Canadian or UK elections, even
Yes.
starting now.
Yeah. And the thing that annoys me, since I'm talking about what other Democrats have done,
Mm-hmm.
one thing that annoys me is the very same people, or at least some of the very same people, who are like, ignore the polls. Polls don't mean anything. Polls don't vote.
Yeah.
When Biden was behind, are
Yeah.
now saying, look at Harris. She's ahead in the polls. And it's like,
Yeah.
well, you can't have it both ways.
Selective evidence. Yeah.
Yeah, I understand you want to promote, but come on.
Yeah, that's just problems with our level of unreality, right?
Yeah.
But while we're on the topic, I want to stop in on this a little bit at the risk of stepping in front of the Kamala Harris enthusiasm train, David. I want to review because I think it's useful to consciously move forward, knowing all the things involved, all the moving
Mm-hmm.
pieces as much as possible. I want to stop and take a little bit of a look at a couple of the reasons why Biden was did well against Trump, and therefore what maybe some people have to think about when it comes to Kamala instead of Biden. So
Mhm.
usually on the Democratic side of the ticket, people don't vote for the person as much as they vote for the principles or what's going to happen there. The cult of personality stuff is usually more of a Republican thing.
Right.
However, there are still people who will change their vote based on this change. So Biden did well with two particular groups that are important that we don't know yet how well Kamala Harris will do. So the first of these groups is older white people. So, the pollsters track a lot of different categories of people based on a lot of things. Older white people generally have two things that they do a lot. First is that they vote a lot, nearly right down the line, like all of them vote. And
Mhm.
also they tend to also listen to a lot, watch a lot of Fox News. So this tends to be a demographic that goes heavily Republican. But Biden did much better in this demographic than Democrats usually do. And this made a difference in 2020. And right away, we're not sure how well Kamala Harris is going to do with older white people. Um, so, right off the bat, we have this. There's another demographic that's also very important. I don't know the history of this demographic necessarily, but I know that Joe Biden has a long history of support of unions and working closely
Mhm.
with unions. And in 2020, he got the union vote. Now, the union vote, uh, it's not like it's a huge number of people the way like you'll see like older white people is a huge number of people, but they're very organized and it's a large block of votes you can get for very little effort if you get them. So, like during the campaign, if you can get the union vote, then the union kind of more or less all goes your way. They help to organize other people to get out the vote also for you, and you can focus on campaigning in other places and that sort of thing. And so we don't know exactly how well Kamala Harris is going to do in these demographics based on the fact that she's just not specifically Joe Biden himself. Maybe she does get a shine from that. I'm sure he will try to do whatever he can to, as a private citizen, can to help her, campaign for her and whatever. But it remains to be seen. So, what are your thoughts on this as a person who actually lives there and how this might turn out?
I mean, I think most of the unions, if not all of the unions who had endorsed Biden, immediately came out and endorsed Harris.
Okay, well, that's a good sign.
Now, does that mean every member will?
Well,
No, because
you can
some
never
of
tell
these,
that,
well,
right?
right. I mean, some of these are, shall we say, very blue collar white uh,
Yeah.
unions, and they sometimes members stupidly vote against their own interests um, because they fall for Republican BS. And so, who knows how many will, would have voted for Biden but are switching to Trump because of that. I wouldn't think there would be very many.
Well,
Um,
we
but
can hope.
yeah. So, yeah, other than that, I mean, when you told me that the older white demographic that Biden did better in that, I didn't know that. Um,
He didn't beat
and
Trump in that
no, I
demographic, but he did better than most other Democrats were expected to do.
okay,
So it's not like it swings, but it's the some
right,
number of votes above a bar, and that
yeah,
helps, right?
yeah. So yeah, I mean, there again, there's no way to really
Mm.
predict.
Yeah.
You know, is are those numbers going to be made up for by some other numbers that have been energized by the campaign now, whereas
Yeah.
they were not very energized to vote for Biden. Will there be other numbers that aren't? Like you've got Bernie out there saying, well, I'm not going to give my endorsement unless she promises to make me an integral part of her, I don't remember if it was campaign or administration. And
Yeah.
like
Well,
he's trying to blackmail. And then there
not a
are
good
the
look, Bernie.
other, the other um, leftists that want to bring the Middle East situation in and are saying if she doesn't come out firmly of a certain way, then we're not going to support her, which I think we've discussed before, cutting off your nose to spite your face
Yeah.
because if,
Because in none of those cases is Trump going to be better for them
yeah,
than a
Trump is
Democratic
literally
candidate.
out there using the word Palestinian as an insult.
Yeah.
Literally, again, he's doing it repeatedly. And you think he's going to be better than Harris?
Yeah.
Come on. So yeah, it remains to be seen whether uh, everybody does unify and realize that no, we have to stop Trump, and then we can negotiate, the best way to handle these situations.
Yeah. So we let off with the big news. So if people were only coming here for that, they don't need to listen to the rest, I guess. But I want to talk about it because I think it'll be fun, in a year or two down the road to just listen to all these election updates all in a series to remember back just how much this changed as it went. Sort of a series of snapshots of a situation as it goes closer to what I think is car crash territory, right? Um,
Yeah, it'll only be fun if Biden wins, or if Harris wins. If 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 Trump wins, looking back at none of this will be fun.
well, I live in Canada, David, so
Oh
it,
yeah,
it
well,
won't be quite as terrible for me.
when we invade
Sorry.
Canada because of
Oh
some
yeah, yeah,
unspecified
yeah.
reason, then
Oh, I know the reason. I know what the reason's going to be. The reason's going to be 5440 or bust. That's what it's going to be. Okay. That joke will take some explanation. Someone else will have to explain it. So we're going to move on.
Google it.
Yeah, Google it. So, we're going to start with the Trump crime pages. This is my favorite part of these election updates is the fact that there's just a ream of them. I pull them up and I update them as I go. Um, so I have five of them and they were numbered 1 to 5. So I had to add a point zero to it so would occur first. Which is, of course, we were tracking indictments in different areas, and we would mention separately that there were the Supreme Court was involved in making some decisions, but point zero has to come first because it affects all the others.
Mm-hmm.
So the Supreme Court of the United States did make a ruling on whether Trump has immunity from prosecution against things that he did while in office. So they I believe they did mention specifically Donald Trump, but the ruling is more general, of course, because that's how their rulings are
Mm-hmm.
supposed to be. But there's a lot of problems with this ruling. It's
Oh yeah.
deliberately vague in a bunch of areas that it should be specific. Like you're going to the highest court in the land to make the definitive word, and then they become deliberately vague. Uh, so there's a dividing line here. They pretty much said that official acts that a person does as president of the United States are are just blanket immunity for official
Mm-hmm.
acts. You can never be
Right.
prosecuted or even considered for prosecution for any of those things. There's other gray areas which are and I, maybe sometime if we feel a need for some kind of deep dive, I'll try to get a more legal expert on this, but it appears like they're trying to provide cover for um, conversations that happen around the president
Mm-hmm.
so that other people can say things to the president that they don't get in trouble for, like in the way that a person can become, like an accessory to a crime just by being
Right.
in the vicinity, knowing about it. So if the president has that immunity, it sort of extends to the people that are around him in those conversations where he's making those plans and doing the things. And it that's a little vague, that language, or at least it was to me when I kind of read it. Um, but the much more vague and probably, in my opinion, more dangerous and deliberately dangerous thing was that they didn't specifically define what was and what was not an official act. And it wasn't like an omission. They listed it in there that the decision for what is and what is not an official act will need to be interpreted by the lower courts that make other decisions,
Right.
which leaves it open for a candidate, a former president, to have a decision not go their way about what is and what is not an official act, and then have it be kicked up again to the Supreme Court, so the Supreme Court can again reinterpret as needed if they feel that it's necessary to provide immunity for someone.
Mm-hmm.
And this is not great. It's, how many ways can we say that presidents shouldn't break laws? And that I think this is sort of a, generally speaking, it's a loophole in that the framers of the Constitution didn't really think that anyone who was going to kind of openly break laws would ever become president. They felt that, that they didn't, maybe it didn't come up in conversation because they just, didn't think of that possibility.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not written anywhere that they have immunity or not immunity. Uh, but this is a bad decision because, again, as I said in a previous podcast, what if Biden just walks up to Trump right now and just shoots him and says, this is for the good of the country, this is an official act, and then just whatever, drops the gun and storms off and continues being president? What's to stop him from doing that?
Yeah, and that was
Just declaring that
literally the attorney general's office gave that as an example. I mean, they said, what's to stop him from ordering SEAL Team 6 to do that?
Yeah.
And yeah, and the Supreme Court, who are a bunch of conservatives and constitutional originalists. So obviously this was in the Constitution, because they would never think to add something that was not in the Constitution. That's
right.
Sarcasm font.
Sarcasm. No, I did catch that. Thank you.
Yes. For anyone else. But although we only have intelligent listeners, so they would have gotten that anyway.
Sure, of course.
So, I mean, yeah, they're being even more blatant than most people thought. Like when this went to the Supreme Court, everyone was like, well, there's no way they're going to do this. Even this Supreme Court won't do this. And even I thought that Roberts would switch sides for this one. And, maybe one other. But no.
He has before?
Yeah.
But
no, not this time. They just all bought into it. And I don't know what more there is to say about it. I will say this. And this is another, you should have a segment for this podcast of David complaining about people on Twitter.
Okay.
There's a lot of people after this came out who were like, well, Biden can just expand the Supreme Court. They said they can't, anything he does is legal. Or Biden can just issue an executive order. Anything he does is legal. And it's like,
yeah, that's not what they said either.
Right. You people are misconstruing and misunderstanding what it said. He can't be prosecuted for it. But that doesn't mean it magically happens. If he makes an executive order saying there are now 4 more justices on the Supreme Court, you still have to get those justices on the Supreme Court. There are still processes for that. They're not just
Congress still has a say in that.
Yeah. If he says, here's another executive order, people don't have to enact it. It's not the same. Saying that you can't be prosecuted, that you have immunity, is not the same as saying you can do anything and it will be done.
Yeah.
And people I some of them were trying to be flippant, but some of them were serious. And it's like, come on, people, you're not helping our cause here by being stupid.
Yeah. Yeah. Be educated, have an educated opinion, have an
Right.
informed opinion. That's the best way. Shooting from the
Your
hip,
example
that's not how
is
it works.
something, yeah, your example is something he could do,
Yeah.
or the one that the Attorney General's office gave of he could order SEAL Team 6. Now, SEAL Team 6 could say no.
Yeah. They could.
That's not a lawful order.
Yeah. And they're
I would
supposed
hope
to, and we
I would
hope
hope
they
that
do.
yeah, right,
We
exactly.
have to hope that they continue
Yeah.
to follow the Constitution in all military matters.
But if in your situation, like if Biden walked up, grabbed a gun out of a Secret Service person's
Orders the Secret
holster,
Service to give him his gun. Why wouldn't they?
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then he does that, well then, yeah, there's not, according to the Supreme Court,
Yeah.
well, I'm sure that a court would say that wasn't official because he's a Democrat. And when it got to the Supreme Court, they would say no. If
Right. But
Trump
what
did it,
if Trump did it? Yeah.
yeah, if Trump did
What if
it,
Trump becomes president again and
yeah,
then does that?
yeah,
Just starts shooting people because
right,
he likes to watch them dance or
yeah.
whatever. Yeah.
He officially likes to watch them dance.
Yes. Yes. Adds new official acts to.
Yes.
So anyway, this affects all of the other cases in some way or other, with the possible exception of this one that comes first, which is the Letitia James. Oh, no, the one that comes last. Sorry. The Letitia James fraud indictments were, as people remember, these were indictments that he was convicted for. He owes fines based on business fraud. He's not allowed to operate any businesses within the state of New York. And his fines came to about $450 million, but he negotiated that down to 170 million. So you see a lot of different numbers getting thrown around here because the situation is a little complex. It's not necessarily true that any of them are wrong. $450 million or so, that wasn't wrong. Also, keep in mind that was a $350 million judgment with $100 million of interest based on how many years that he's done it. So that's two numbers. It's negotiated down to about 170 million. And then he has also the civil suit that was levied against him by E. Jean Carroll for $83.3 million in a judgment. So people kind of add these two numbers together regularly and say that he owes $250,000 in judgments. And that's not a wrong number either, based on which things you add in or keep out, or at what point you look at the number. And that seems to be already fairly complex, but that's the state of those fines as of now. So those are
Well,
decided. I don't know there's
so,
much to go over there, but yeah.
well, the 170 million that you said he negotiated down to, that's just the amount he has to put up in order to appeal.
That's also true. Yeah.
If he loses that appeal, it reverts back to the
Right.
original number.
Yeah, that's the size of the bond he has to put up,
Right.
which the last time I checked, he still has not done.
Well, I think he put it up, but
Else paid it. Yeah.
yeah, I think that
Yeah,
they
it's
have questioned and
the
said,
source and whether that's right.
right,
And
do they
right.
actually have,
Is this a campaign contribution?
well,
Right.
more like, do they have $170 million? You're putting up this bond, but
Mm-hmm.
do you actually have that amount of money in case something goes wrong?
Yeah.
You have to put up actual solid financial backing.
Yeah. It can't
So,
be property. Yeah. So
um,
that's the least of the worries at this time, I think.
yeah.
The hush money indictment since last we talked, the trial completed. Well, actually, the last time we talked, it had completed and he was found guilty of 34
Mm-hmm.
counts, right? So since that time, the Supreme Court of the United States has made their ruling, and they granted Trump some limited immunity, and they also said that some conversations that surround him in when he's in the Oval Office are considered privileged, or maybe they shouldn't be used or whatever.
Mhm.
And it turns out that during the trial, wouldn't you know it, some of the people who testified about conversations they had with Trump while he was president. So this casts some shadow on some of the testimony. And so he was originally meant to be um he was meant to be sentenced on June 11th or July 11th, which would have affected a bunch of other stuff. But because of the Supreme Court ruling, which came out earlier than expected, the sentencing was moved to, let me find the date. I wrote it, September
September
18th.
18th.
Right,
Yeah.
here it is. So yeah, we're gonna that's kicked. They're gonna reconsider some things, I guess. I don't know what the status of that's gonna be, if they're gonna have to do the whole thing over again, because some of it you can't just take some things out. I'm not sure. What's your take on this, David?
Well, basically, what I have heard is that in trial, sometimes, yes, sometimes you get a situation where it's like, oh, they should not have done that. And sometimes the judge will be like, okay, be that as it may, the outcome would not have been any different, and therefore we're going to proceed.
Right.
Other times they say, okay, that changes everything. I mean, just look at the Alec Baldwin trial,
Yeah.
where one of the prosecutors didn't share certain evidence, and the
Yeah.
judge was like, "That's it, we're done. I'm sick of you. We're canceling this whole thing,
Yeah.
and you can't refile it."
If you're not going to play by the rules,
Right.
then right.
In this case, they wouldn't do that, but it is possible that this judge or an appeals court or the Supreme Court could say, no, we don't know that he would have been convicted if you hadn't had those people testifying. Therefore, it's time for a retrial.
Mhm.
I, if I were placing my money,
Mm.
I would bet that the judge in the case says, doesn't matter, doesn't apply. The New York State Appeals Court says the same thing, and it ends up at the U.S. Supreme Court, which will happen after the election.
Go to the
And,
New York Supreme Court,
well,
state
see,
charges.
the court, New York is weird. The New
Oh,
York court that it's in right now is called the Supreme Court.
oh, neat.
Their first level court is called the Supreme Court.
Okay.
I don't know what happens
Awkward.
after. Yes, yes. So maybe there is another court after the Court of Appeals in New York. Maybe it's
Okay.
the Super Supreme Court. I don't know. I
Ultra
can't
Supreme
remember.
Court.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
But either way, I still think that court would, however many state courts it goes to, I think they will rule against Trump, and I think it'll get to the U.S. Supreme Court. And if the election will be over by then.
Yeah. That won't happen before the
Right.
election. The
If,
sentencing may happen before the election, but
right. If he has been elected, then they will say, no, you have to do a retrial. And by the way, you can't do the retrial while he's president. So you have to postpone it. And if he's not been elected, then they may not care. Then they may just be like, okay, we don't care. Just go with it.
hinges on the election.
Yeah.
Sounds right to me. So, item number 3 on the Trump crime pages is what's called the Florida indictments. There were 2 items here that we listed as separate because they had separate jurisdictions. There's the Florida indictments, and then there's the Washington, D.C. indictments. And they were both, I didn't mention this before, previous times when I listed these, but both sets of indictments have been run by Jack Smith. So the Florida indictments that have been presided over by Judge Cannon have been entirely dismissed, wholesale, all of them.
Yes.
Wildly. This is nuts. So she lists a bunch of things in her ruling. and I want to get a really good link for this in the show notes. I've listened to a few now that they're each about 15-20 minutes, so I can't just play them as a clip. But the crux of this seems to be that she claims that Jack Smith cannot be a special prosecutor. And not only that he can't be because he's disqualified because he holds some property that prevents him specifically from being a special prosecutor, she appears to not recognize any authority from any special prosecutors. This seems to be the crux of her argument, that there's despite all legal precedent for all other special prosecutors, including the very famous Ken Starr, who prosecuted Bill Clinton, that she just says, no, it turns out that everyone else in the history of U.S. legal system has been wrong, and I'm right, and I say it's this way, that Jack Smith is not a prosecutor, and there's no such thing as a special prosecutor. No one can do this. You can't even replace him with someone else. Wild that she waited till this long in the process, like a year later, to suddenly now dismiss this. It seems like a last ditch effort to try to kick this before the election.
It does, but I also don't know. I mean, I guess they can. Would judges normally make a ruling like this on their own? Like, would they just come out of the blue and say, hey, you're a special prosecutor. I don't believe in special prosecutors. You're gone. Or does it have to be something that is brought up by one side or the other so that it can be briefed?
Well, it appears that the opposing side, the opposing counsel, didn't file a brief that said that Jack Smith's status as a special prosecutor is in doubt, or that the authority of special prosecutors are in doubt. This appears to be something she came up with on her own, which is
She didn't come
also,
up with. She's not smart enough to come up with anything on
well, yeah, but she didn't come up with it
an ultra conservative.
Right, but she didn't come up with it based on a brief from the defense counsel.
Right.
Right. It's not that the defense counsel questioned it and then she said, you know what, you're right, Mr. Defense Councilman. This guy doesn't have any standing, and now it's dismissed. She didn't come to it from that. She comes from this from somewhere else.
I thought that they did question the legality of his appointment. I thought that and everybody was like, I can't believe she's having hearings on this. This is the dumbest thing ever. Everybody knows that they're legal. This is just a stalling tactic, which made it even more surprising when she ruled this way, because everybody was pissed off that she even had a hearing about it.
Yeah. Well, every legal expert I talked to that I listened to express an opinion on this has essentially said this is wild. A huge part of this comes from a difference in the meanings of the words officer and official, which there is precedent to say that they're considered to be the same thing for the purposes of these things. And so because one document says he's an officer of the court and another document says we recognize officials of the court, that this is one of the many things she points to as indicating that he's not rightfully placed.
This is why when I was writing rules and laws, I always said, you got to use the right words.
Oh, yeah.
You got to use the right,
and one would imagine that in the legal profession, they would try to use the right words. I don't know.
Well, you would imagine that, but
it also seems like they've recognized they've had times where they looked at this and said, yeah, you know what? They're the same thing for all intents and purposes, the same thing.
Right.
But she just ignores that part and just says, you know what? They're not.
Right.
Wild.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I have reviewed proposed laws where they just put in incorrect terms, and I had to go through and say, this terminology is incorrect. You have to use this word. And then it comes back and they haven't fixed it, or they fixed it wrong. I'm like, no, you have to use these words.
Yes. And lawyers should be pedantic. That's generally what we pay them to be.
Well, I'm not talking about lawyers. I'm talking about politicians,
Sure. Also politicians, right?
Yeah. Right. Because you have, courts that rule in this way. I mean, the Supreme Court has ruled crazy things on other stuff recently based on,
Yeah.
oh, well, the law didn't specifically say XYZ. It's like, well, but it clearly
Yeah.
meant it,
Some real
and
kindergarten logic there. Yeah. You
yeah,
didn't say that I couldn't throw the sand upwind and have it drift down into Susie's face. You didn't
yeah,
say I couldn't do that. You just said I couldn't
right.
throw the sand at Susie. So
Yeah,
obviously I'm okay now, right? I just
yeah,
throw it in the air and it drifts down onto Susie.
yeah.
It's totally different. Right.
So, so yeah, she has, yeah, yeah. I mean, she's nuts.
Oh
She's,
yeah.
and obviously, Jack Smith has filed an appeal. I'm sure that appeal, I mean, the appeal may be decided, but then it'll be appealed to the Supreme Court. Even,
Um yeah.
even this
Mm,
Supreme Court, well, first of all, it'll never be decided by the Supreme Court before the election. But besides
no.
that, even this Supreme Court, I can't see saying all special prosecutors are invalid, because think of the power that gives to Democrats too.
Yeah, yeah.
Like,
Because who are you going to get to investigate these individual offenses by politicians and whatnot?
well, and not only that, like, so you're saying that Joe Biden should have overseen the prosecution of Hunter Biden?
Yeah,
That he shouldn't have been able to hire a special prosecutor for that?
yeah,
Um, it just makes no sense. And so, uh, so again, it may come down to the outcome of the election,
Well, I think that's another one that's gonna, yeah,
yeah,
you're exactly right there.
which, is kind of the whole point of having an independent, allegedly independent court system, that it shouldn't come down to elections. And
Yeah.
yet, here we are.
Right. So, as you mentioned, Jack Smith is appealing that to the higher court, the court just
Mhm.
above that. I don't know what it
Yeah.
is, some number
That's
of
just the
forget.
appeals court. Yeah.
Right. So next on the list, the DC indictments, also run by Jack Smith. These are the ones involving dealing with Trump's involvement in the January 6th insurrection.
Mm-hmm.
So the SCOTUS immunity ruling throws this entirely into disarray
Yeah.
because a bunch of things he does as president are now based on whether they were done as official acts. One would imagine that this sort of thing that he does as a candidate is not an official act, but it has to be like there's things that have to be refiled with different wording to avoid certain things. Uh, and some charges might have to go away because of their, inability to extricate them from official acts, that sort of thing. And well, I probably done that to start from like full scratch, but he does have to refile all of his indictments. Zero chance this is going to happen
Oh, yeah.
before the election. He might get them filed before the election, but there's no way this is going to get in front of uh, into a real trial before the election occurs. So yet another one that will be determined by whether which way this election goes, because these are federal indictments, and Trump will absolutely grant himself immunity if he feels he needs it based on this, and just tell
And
this
then
things
pardon
to go
himself
away.
just for,
And everyone involved,
yeah.
for real this
Yep.
time, not like last time where he kind of waffled on it,
Yeah.
you know, which he now tries to make hay from based on all of the January 6th indictments. They Republicans regularly refer to them as political prisoners, which
Mm-hmm.
they are not. Okay.
Or hostages, the January 6th hostages.
Yeah, yeah, right. The hostages. Yeah, yeah. Like anyone in the Republican Party cares about the fate of these people such that you could hold them, in order to change decisions that the Republicans are making.
Right.
That's right. No one is doing that, and even if they did, it wouldn't work because Trump doesn't care about their fate.
Yeah.
So, moving on to the fifth item on the great grand list of Trump indictments, which is the Georgia indictments run by Fani Willis, at least for now. So
Hmm.
there is an appeal to remove Fannie Willis from this case. The grounds for the appeal are seem to be mostly based on the fact they just don't like her. I don't know what these arguments are. She's the prosecutor for this jurisdiction.
Well, they're still claiming conflict of interest, that the original decision with her and her special prosecutor boyfriend,
Okay. All
that
right.
should have done more than just make the boyfriend leave the case, that that she should have been conflicted out.
Yeah. Well, they already got him conflicted out. So, and they
Hmm.
had a whole hearing on that, and the hearing made a decision. The decision was that one of them has to go. You decide. And then she decided that the special guy went, and she stayed.
Right. Well, that's what they're appealing and saying, no, that's not enough.
Yeah. Well, she should say, "Would you like to switch? You like him to tap in? I'll leave," or
Yeah.
like, I don't know. But at any rate, this will not see light before the election. The hearing that with which they were going to discuss
Hmm.
whether she can be the prosecutor was going to be in October, but now will be in December. So they won't even be able to decide whether or not she can be the prosecutor until after the election is over.
Hmm.
So yet another of these cases that got successfully had the clock run out and is not going to have any level of trial before the election, which is on November 5th, by the way.
Yes.
Anyone who's in the US listening to this plans to vote. Voting day is November 5th. Register to vote now, please. Make a
And
plan
check
for
your
that day.
registration. Check your
Yep,
registration, especially
check
if
your
you live in a red
registration.
state.
Yes, they are purging voter rolls in many red states, and you might show up and find that you're not on the voter roll anymore. Terrible.
Hmm.
If you didn't register to vote, you should still go. If you find you're not on the voter roll, you should still show up. You can sign the affidavit. You can get your vote counted later. And I'm very sure we're going to be counting these ones many times over. It's not going to be decided in one day. Sorry.
Stop the count.
Yeah, yeah. Stop the count in the places where we're ahead and continue the count
Right.
places where we're behind. Yeah,
Yes.
of course. So now that that's out of the way, we can talk about the real stuff, David. The real stuff. Okay, so July 13th, Trump is having a rally in Pennsylvania. And he's I didn't catch this live. I got a ding on Twitter for an alert and I caught it just a few minutes after it occurred, but
Hmm.
it was live on I think a couple different networks. And a couple of live streams and everything else. There was at least 5 dozen people who were taking some kind of picture or video. Not all of them had Trump in the frame. Some were taking video of other things at the time,
Hmm.
but this flooded social media huge. This immediately, everyone who had anything even related to this put it online, and everyone just said,
Yes.
"Figure it out, tell us what happened, or decide for yourselves, or
Yes.
whatever." It's hard to express how terrible an idea this is because no one, even then, can get all the information and collate it properly and line it up and everything else. For anyone who was the least bit conspiratorial minded, even if they hadn't shifted and publicly said anything along these lines before, a lot of people immediately said, "Oh, I don't know if I buy it. I don't know if this was a real thing. I don't know if it's real. I don't know." And how they thought it wasn't real inevitably lined up to what the outcome was that they wanted. So,
Yes.
Democrats, because maybe we should step through just a little bit of the basic events that we're going to talk about. So,
Yeah, and I
right.
think it's important to point out, as of now, we plan to do a more deep dive
Yes, yes,
podcast
this
on
is going to be
this.
fairly superficial. There'll be a lot more deep dive
Much
on the
much like Trump's
details.
wound.
Right, superficial, very superficial.
Yes.
Yes. So the basic details that were available to everyone with which to make a decision at the time were that Trump was speaking in Pennsylvania a few minutes into his rally. Uh, he was shot at There was a sound that when I listened to it at first, it kind of sounded like firecrackers, fireworks of some kind. There's a lot of reasons why this occurs, and we'll go through that when we do our deeper dive. But to me, that was the first thing I thought of, fireworks. And then I saw him grab his ear very, very quickly, and I
Mm-hmm.
thought, oh, this isn't good. And then the Secret Service ran in and tumbled into the ground, which I wasn't surprised about because I think even if you brought fireworks to a Trump rally, the Secret Service are going to cover the president because that's not planned. That's not cool.
Yeah.
Shouldn't do that. But the way he grabbed his ear so quickly, like he got stung by something, I thought, okay, well, and then someone said there's a shooter, and immediately we got a couple details right away. There was someone who was shot and killed on site.
Mm-hmm.
There were two other people who were badly wounded. I believe they have both made it. I'll have to double check that, but I'm pretty sure that they both got rushed to hospital and they both made it past their initial injury anyway. And Trump was carried off stage. Some video showed him losing a boot and calling for it. But what he definitely did before they got him off stage was after they picked him up, he saw a moment and he reached for the mic and raised his fist and yelled, "Fight."
Yeah.
So this seems to be the
Yeah.
thing that most threw off the people on the left because they just immediately thought this image is going to become some version of iconic. They probably pictured it on the cover of Time magazine for the end of the year. And they just thought, well, that's it. If we let him have this moment, this sort of heroic moment with the blood smeared across his face and him raising his fist to yell fight, that it's over already. And
Yes.
granted that Biden was still running at the time. He hadn't stepped down yet.
Yeah.
And they said, I don't believe it. It's not real. He staged this so that he could have this picture. This picture is too perfect. Yeah, this is just how things turn out sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, it's
I
like I
Yeah,
saw on Twitter, someone posted other pictures that were, quote, too perfect, like the iconic picture
yeah,
of Michael Jordan coming in for a dunk that everyone
yeah,
knows.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
that picture's too perfect. Well, you take a million pictures and you have all those, cameras on you. Now,
yeah.
did he purposely do that? Yeah, he did. Because that's what goes in through his mind at all the
He's
time.
an opportunist. He saw an
Yes.
opportunity and he took it. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
So, I mean, I know, like I said, we will be going into a deeper dive, but
yeah. We're gonna collect all the things. Yeah,
it super pissed me off on
yeah,
Twitter to see all these people who make fun of or attack the Alex Joneses and the other MAGA conspiracies
yeah,
immediately go into conspiracy mode. And there
yeah,
are some who are even like doctors I know who are like, well, if a bullet had hit him in the ear, it would have torn it up. If it had hit him, yes.
yeah,
If it had skimmed it, people seem to
yeah,
misunderstand physics.
yeah,
There is always a point where something just skims.
yeah,
It may not be likely, it may not, seem like it, could happen, but it does,
yeah.
and
There's some
there are,
proximity as you step away
right.
1,000th of an inch at a time. There's a difference between blowing an ear apart and just nicking it.
Yeah.
And what's the if we're going to get really into the physics, David, the little gap of air that's around a
Mm-hmm.
bullet will compress as a bullet rushes into the air.
Right.
And it'll heat up a little bit, and this get as it compresses, it gets kind of hard. So you get sort of this little gap of air that's around a bullet that also gets not as hard as the bullet, but also very, very hard. So you can miss by a hair and still draw blood.
Yeah.
Like that's possible. So, and this is probably very close to what happened here. It was so close that it just grazed barely. And it's a part of the year that at the very top, you have blood
Mhm.
rushing through there. Yeah, he bled. Yeah, because the bullet grazed him. But what definitely didn't happen is that there's no way that he put himself in the actual line of fire.
Right. Yeah,
And
you and
those
I were
weren't
both
fake bullets.
yeah, you and I were
Yeah.
both on Twitter saying the same thing, which is that this man cares for one person and one person only, and that is himself.
Yes. Right.
And there's no way he is trusting any shooter, let alone
Any
some
shooter.
random 20-year-old,
Yeah.
to get within a hair's breadth of
No.
his head.
Even in the same direction. Like even if
Yeah,
the, even imagining that the plan was to just shoot toward him and just to cause a thing, there's no
yeah,
way he would agree to be even getting shot toward. There's no way.
right.
This is just not possible. One person, and they might listen to this. I won't mention who it is, but one person tried to compare this to the burning of the Reichstag in Germany,
A lot
Nazi
more than
Germany.
one person. A lot more than one
Right.
person
And I
said
pointed
that.
out immediately that this might be comparable if the Nazi
Mm.
party was inside the Reichstag when it caught fire, which wasn't true. And so immediately you see the difference here is that when the Reichstag burned, the Nazis themselves, especially Hitler, was not in any way personally in danger. But in this situation, Trump actually personally in danger. Huge difference between these two things.
Yeah. And let's just say
So
also
yeah.
the history, US
Mhm.
history, world history was changed by a fraction of an inch, or
Yeah.
would have been changed by a fraction of an inch if he had not turned his head to look at the chart that was there.
Yeah.
If this were a book, if this were like a CIA spy movie, Mission Impossible or whatever, you'd be like, come on, really? He happened to turn at exactly the right moment.
It's
Boy, that is a plot device you've got going there. And I think that's why a lot of people who are primed on those movies
yeah.
are like, no, there's no way. But it
Right.
happens. It happens all the time. Things
Definitely
are
happens.
decided by fractions all the time. Now, they're not usually big things. Maybe it's a baseball game where because the wind happened to gust at the exact wrong moment,
Yeah.
the ball stays inside the park instead of being the winning home run. Maybe it's a World Series game 7 where the Cubs are down and they're depressed, down and out, and there happens to be a rain delay, and one of the teammates goes in and talks to them and pumps them up, and they come in and win their first World Series in 108 years that they
That's some
probably
wishful
wouldn't have.
thinking there, David. That's some really
No,
wishful thinking there.
yeah, I know, ridiculous. It would never happen
Wow.
that way. Um,
Yeah.
but
The Cubs in the World Series.
I know,
Come on.
obviously, it was planned. um, but all these things happen. Unlikely things happen.
Yes. And
And
here's the other
in
thing
this
to note,
case,
that turning his head is not an unlikely thing.
right,
And he had no way of knowing there was a bullet coming at him when he turned his head. It's just
right.
people move. People, life continues to occur. He had a thing that he was working on and it required him to turn his head right then. And
Yeah,
yeah, it's not like he did a very specific, head bob or duck or something that's not like him to have done. Yeah, there's nothing about this that shows us that it's a fake, and there's a bunch of stuff that show us that it's real. And deviating toward it being fake because it
mm-hmm.
gives you a better sense, that the election will go your way or whatever, isn't how we decide how things are real. It's just not.
Yeah, yeah. And I had to literally start threatening people on Twitter Like, if you do not stop spreading this shit, I will be blocking you. I will be unfollowing you and blocking you. And, because, and there were some people I don't follow who just get retweeted into my timeline who kept doing it too. And it's like, no, I'm never going to take you seriously again now.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and I'm a little less hardcore on that issue. I was blocking the people that were advocating that the bullet was a little too far to the one side, if you know what I mean. Because I was also trying to tell people that that's not the way you should want this to go either.
Right.
Assassinating political people is not how elections should be decided. Uh, I've long said on this podcast that Trump's ideas are the thing that need to go away. Having
Yes.
Trump go away and have his ideas remain will be the worst outcome. And having him become a martyr would make the
Mm-hmm.
removal of his ideas much, much harder.
Yes.
And let's just not assassinate people. Let's just not decide things with violence that way. But yeah, I had to remove some people because they wouldn't stop this madness in this way, and
Yeah.
I couldn't be part of that. Sad,
Yeah.
sad.
So, and there's still people, as we're recording this, there's still arguments going on about it. Trump, as just a little while before we sat down to record, Trump agreed to sit down and give a victim statement to the FBI.
Mm.
And I have to say, things were not helped by Trump and his son and some others exaggerating things.
Oh yeah,
Trump
yeah,
saying, I felt the bullet ripping through my ear. And
right,
I think it was Eric Trump said something like he lost 2 inches of his ear, or something like that.
right, yeah,
And
yeah.
then, of course, him wearing that comically oversized bandage
At the
uh, at
at
the
the RNC,
convention
yeah.
that he wasn't wearing while playing golf the next day
Well,
after the shooting.
okay, David, I just have to stop down on that point
Yeah.
because I can't prove that he was golfing on the Sunday. There was a picture floating around saying that he was golfing, but that picture came from 2022.
No, but he said he was out golfing.
Well,
He was
maybe,
out
but
there.
right, okay, okay. Well, if he said it, then that's different. But I couldn't confirm that he was or
Yeah.
wasn't. I just want to be a little careful because there was a lot of people who would just show the picture
Okay.
and say, look what Trump was doing the next day." But
I
that,
thought that he had said, "Look, I'm out,
yeah, yeah, I think
living life or whatever."
we,
But
I want to be a little careful on that point because
right.
that's
Okay.
yeah, reality. Even if you
Yes.
want, like I want to, I'd love to say Trump was golfing, except that I can't
Right.
prove that he was. So I
Right.
just want to be a little careful on that point. Yeah,
Yeah. But the point is still the comically
yeah,
oversized
oh
bandage.
yeah, yeah,
And now you see, and there was a picture that was posted by a well-known news photographer that shows like nothing. You can't even see a scratch on his ear now.
right. The ear heals fairly quickly because it's got almost nothing there but cartilage. So yeah,
So, I mean, the point is, they didn't help the cause.
yeah,
By making things sound worse, it makes the people who believe it's a conspiracy that he wasn't hit with anything. Um,
yeah,
like I heard right away, one of the ridiculous things was someone say, I've seen enough wrestling to know a self-inflicted cut when I know it, when I see it.
yeah,
Like that he
right,
had a razor blade hidden in his hand and cut his own ear or something like
yeah,
that. Um,
right. And
but
okay, but
yeah. So anyway, again,
Trump didn't actually do the wrestling
yeah,
on WWE. Let's
right.
also make that clear. He was
Yeah,
involved with the WWE, but he didn't actually do the wrestling himself.
yeah. Um, so anyway, like I said, we'll address this
Yeah.
all the conspiracy nonsense later. But um yeah, I don't know. I think we can move on from that.
Yeah.
Other
Yeah.
than to say the polls did not like jump tremendously in his favor
No,
like everyone thought they
no,
would.
they didn't. They were unfazed. So I want to float the notion, ask it right here.
Mm-hmm.
Does the electorate even care if he lives or dies? If you have an assassination attempt against you and your poll numbers do not move at all, what does that say?
I think it
Like,
says he survived. I mean, I don't know. I would like to think people aren't going to say they're going to vote for someone just because someone else tried to kill him.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
I'm sure there are a few, and of course, there are always those people on Twitter who are probably bogus, you know,
rage
Russian
farmers.
controlled
Yeah.
bot accounts or something saying, well, I wasn't going to vote, but now I am, you know. And plus, the fact that it turned out to be some random 20-year-old registered Republican.
Mm, yeah.
Um, if he had been uh, uh, 40-year-old ex, you know, uh, campaign manager
In
for Biden or something like that,
yeah.
then things might have been different.
Well, the ideal shooter from the Republican perspective would have been a trans person who was, felt
An illegal immigrant.
some, well, yeah, yeah, right. Also an illegal immigrant who was a trans person who, what age would they have been? Probably mid 20s, still young, but, yeah, I mean, and obviously that wasn't it either. So,
Yeah. Sold fentanyl on the side.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Um,
Then the
yeah,
stories stack up. Yeah, right.
right, right. But
So yeah, probably right. We should move on. This is segment's getting a little long. So we do have one more thing to cover. Um RNC the RNC occurred starting 2 days after Trump was shot at a rally.
mhm.
And there's not really a lot to report here, except for the fact that he did pick a vice president, a man named J.D. Vance.
A man currently named J.D. Vance. He's
Right.
changed it a few times.
He has changed his name a few times. Yeah, and the internet has made much of many of these things. He's most well known for having written a memoir called Hillbilly Elegy that was made into a Netflix movie in uh 2020, I believe. Used to not like Trump, but now sort of obviously likes Trump. And the most important thing about him is that he is essentially does whatever Peter Thiel tells him to do. So whatever people want to make of that, they can. No one is in any way trying to downplay the Peter Thiel connection, which is an interesting part of the counter narrative that the Republicans are doing here. They seem to like and embrace the fact that they have sort of a tech bro in their camp.
Mhm.
Um, there are people who are having a problem with JD Vance, most particularly the fact that JD Vance married a woman, an Asian woman, and he has children with this Asian woman, which is not a problem for most people, except if your name is Nick Fuentes, who has made a really big stink about this. And I say, let them fight. Um,
Yeah, because even
Eventually, yeah,
even Vance trying to defend. Well, I used the word. Someone else used the word defend, and I said it didn't look like defense to me. Where he said something in an interview like, "Well, obviously she isn't white, but I still love her." Was not those exact words, and maybe the word
uh,
"still" wasn't in there, but
right.
um,
Not great, man. Not great.
yeah, yeah, and it's like if you can't even stand up to the white supremacists to defend your own wife and kids, I, I
Yeah,
mean, it really reminds me of Ted Cruz when Trump called his wife ugly, and now Ted Cruz still bows down at the altar
yeah,
of Trump.
yeah,
It's like, and like you said, Vance was a never Trumper until he determined it was better for his career to become a Trumper.
yeah,
So he has no morals, he has no conscience. He is
yeah,
doing whatever he wants for whatever he can for power. Um, and those are the most dangerous people of all.
yeah. Right. Because how do you sway them on any issue?
Well, you can't sway him. Well,
You can only do it by
by
giving them
money,
more power.
money and power. Yeah.
Yeah.
I do think it's important, by the way, to note, Peter, you called it, I don't know how to pronounce his name. You said Teal. So
Yeah.
the TH is a T.
Yeah.
Um, Nate Silver now works for him.
Oh yeah.
So anything you see from Nate Silver purporting to be an independent analysis or polling or anything, keep that in mind.
Right. Yeah. Someday I might even do a whole episode on Peter Thiel because he's fascinating. And it's he's done enough things now that it might be worth it. So, but
Yeah.
it might probably be after the election, after
Yeah.
all that's finally settled, because he'll still be there. He'll still, no matter how
Right.
the thing comes out, he'll still be there.
Right.
Important to note that usually the RNC functions as a pep rally, but again, just like the shooting at the rally, this doesn't appear to have affected Trump's poll numbers even a little. One wonders if the gauge is even connected to the device that it's trying to measure. I
Yeah,
don't
I
know
was
what to make
expecting
of that.
there's always a convention bump.
Yeah.
Always. Except not now.
Well, I think this is an indication that either they're completely making up the poll numbers, or there is just whatever's happening in this election cycle is just so different that you can't rely on the normal set of rules.
Yeah, I think that's it. I mean, I think that
Yeah.
certain votes are locked in on either side. And there's a small percentage at play. And there's always a small percentage error bar.
Mm-hmm.
And does the percentage in play even exceed the error bar? I don't know.
Yeah.
Like there was one poll done recently, and I think it was in a specific state, where there was literally 0% black support for Trump.
Mm-hmm.
Now, do I think there is 0% support for
No.
black support for Trump? No. Should there be 0%? Yes. Should there be 0% across the board? All races? Yes. But clearly,
It's
the
it's
however
probably somewhere
many,
close to 10 to 15%,
yeah, however
realistically.
many people they polled, they didn't happen to catch the one or two out of the
Right.
1,000, 1,500 that would,
Small sample pool. Yeah.
yeah. And um so yeah, and that's why another reason I talked about polls earlier. They're like, oh, the polls are up. She's up 2%. 2% is within the error bar.
Yeah.
I'm
And she's
sorry.
not
I
over
mean,
50% yet.
yeah. So
So the RFK factor becomes a much bigger factor until
right.
your candidate gets over 50%. Yeah. At which point it's a non-factor.
Yeah. And so it's not even that because it's got to be within each state.
Well, also true is that you can't just use national polls to predict this, because state by state it goes this way. But if you're going to look even at one state,
Right.
unless Kamala Harris is over 50% in that state, it's definitely not any kind of sure thing, even being ahead,
Mm-hmm.
because of the RFK Jr. factor.
Right. And yeah, I mean, basically, I think that they're fighting over that small percent,
Yeah.
and it'll be that small percent plus turnout, and
Yeah.
who can do a better job at getting people to the polls, or if the Republicans can do a better job of keeping people from the polls, because that seems to be more their
That's
modus
their style.
operandi.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the main and consequential things. I do have a couple of other little footnotes here. First, it's my pleasure to announce that Marianne Williamson is still not going to be president in 2024.
But she said she was going to be the perfect candidate when Biden dropped
Yeah,
out.
yeah, yeah. Well, that's yeah, not going to happen. So I also am very pleased to announce that I have definitive proof, David, that RFK Jr. listens to this podcast. What do you think of that?
Mm-hmm. I'm sure he does.
Yes.
Yes.
So there have been some reports that RFK Jr. reached out to the Trump campaign to discuss giving Trump support, to drop out of the race, to support Trump in the race in exchange for a cabinet position. And then at the end of the RNC, there was a leaked video. I'm highly suspicious of what went on there. I think this was something that RFK Jr.
Mhm.
did purposely, because I don't see him being stupid enough to allow them to just have recorded him with himself
Yeah.
on speakerphone like that. But anyway, there was a leaked video in which Trump is calling him to talk about the possibility of getting his support and giving him something, which was very non-committal and not specific, which is probably why RFK Jr. leaked it, so he could get something else from it, which is whatever he thought he was going to get, being the maverick candidate, probably.
Right.
But it should be noted that I stated on this podcast that everyone said that I was foolish for saying that RFK Jr. might drop out for this, and clearly he's thought about it. So since no one else had thought about it except for me, obviously
Yes.
he must have got the idea from me.
Yeah, I
Not
mean,
that I wanted him to do that, but he did.
if he thought that Trump would appoint him like head of the FDA or Surgeon General or
Yeah,
you know who knows what, then I could
yeah,
see him doing it. I had said to you, no, he won't do it because he's doing this for the grift. He's doing this to put forth his views. But if he could find a way to better grift and push
yeah.
his erroneous views, then yeah, I could see it. Um, I don't know. I still don't know who would be hurt or helped more if he withdraws.
Yeah, I don't know either.
Because
Who would be hurt or helped more by him staying in the race?
right, I mean that's exactly it. We don't know. He
Yeah,
claims to be a Democrat, but he's clearly not, and he shares
yeah,
all the conspiracies of the MAGA Republicans. So, I mean, there are still a few Democrats, even leftists, whatever you want to call them, who believe his bullshit.
yeah.
Um, I don't know that they'd vote for Harris anyway.
Hard to say. Hard to say. But I just want to say I have at least one listener. His name's RFK Jr. Thank you. If you're listening, RFK Jr., do you have anything to say to RFK Jr., David, while
Yes,
he's on the
but it
line?
would get you an explicit tag on this podcast. So
It's okay. I can bleep it. Go ahead. This will be fun.
off.
Excellent. Okay. I will have fun bleeping you for that. Okay. All right. Well, that's it for now. Anyone who has any questions, comments, concerns about this podcast can send an email to truthunrestricted@gmail.com. You can also find me on Twitter, Spencer G. Watson. And I'm also on Threads and Blue Sky, though I don't check them as often as I should. Um, yeah, Spencer Watson 39 on Threads, and I think I'm just Spencer Watson on Blue Sky. So, yeah, where can people find you, David?
So I am at David Bloomberg on Twitter and Blue Sky. I am at David Bloomberg TV on Threads because that's connected to Instagram. And on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok, I post mostly about reality, well, all about reality TV. So I'm at David Bloomberg TV on all of those. If you want my political takes and other things that we talk about here, you'll find them mostly still on Twitter, some on Threads and Blue Sky. If you know, want reality TV and somehow just stumbled on us, me here, then you can check out those other sites as well.
Great. And that will sign off. So, till next time, David.
Till next time.
Stop recording.